As the Grand Master of the Jedi, Master Yoda has seen the galactic scales rise and fall. He saw the Jedi Order in their most prosperous era during the High Republic. He saw how they forewent experimentation, the death of Jedi Grandmaster Faye Kovan, and his eventual ascent to Master, and eventually Supreme Grandmaster of the entire Jedi Order. Yoda has seen countless generations of Jedi die, countless times, over and over again. During his 9 centuries of life, he mastered countless Force abilities, as perhaps the wisest and most powerful of all the Jedi up until the prequel era. Grandmaster Yoda is undisputedly one of the most formidable Force users to have ever existed. Yoda is undisputedly and unquestionably one of the wisest Jedi in all of Star Wars' history, and perhaps the wisest being ever. But the High Republic has proven exactly how he failed the Jedi Order, and it is a fragment of Star Wars lore that I am not seeing covered much here on YouTube. So, join us as spacefarers as we explore the hidden homeworld of Tython and discover enriched Jedi lore and discover how Yoda, that pure avatar of light, the supreme master of the Jedi Order, ultimately failed the Jedi, even in his final waning hours. A look at how the Jedi operated during the days of the High Republic era spotlights how failures by the Jedi Order while under Yoda's leadership and primary doctrine led to its downfall. The Jedi Order, most Star Wars fans know, was a very dispassionate, uninformed, and staid organization. They not only forbid love and attachment to other beings, but also show an inability to consider shades of grey, which ultimately will cause them to be absolutely exterminated by the Sith in the Second Great Jedi Purge. By the time of the Clone Wars, the Jedi Order was thousands of years old and steeped in traditions and dogmatic beliefs. The Jedi Code had been codified into a rigid doctrine, and the philosophical underpinnings of the entire Order had become stagnant. It is partially due to this unending of ways of doing things that Darth Sidious was able to enact its plan. Unlike the Jedi who had become victims of their own success, the Sith had learned to adapt and mutate and change with the times, having 1,000 generations stretching from Darth Bane to Sidious and Plagueis. This Sith rule of 2 had each Sith become more powerful each generation than the original Sith. Meanwhile, the Jedi often failed at considering or even tolerating possibilities or ideas that did not adhere to their narrow dogmatic viewings of the Force, with them completely ousting experimentation and the possibility to learn new abilities with the Force. This led to the mishandling of Anakin Skywalker, the Clone Wars, and the Jedi's own downfall in Order 66. Yoda even came to this realization himself during the Star Wars Revenge of the Sith, as told by the movie's novelization by Matthew Stover, with Yoda stating during his duel with Palpatine, the Sith had remade themselves. They had become new, while the Jedi had spent the last millennium training to refight the last war. Yoda and the Jedi never considered the possibility the Sith had the ability to mutate. They did not see the dark side as anything valuable, very similar to how Sidious saw the light side. But Yoda and the Jedi were even worse. They saw that the dark side would never change. They thought the dark side was offense, pure brute strength, not tactical genius. Darth Tenebris's master started off the line of scientists, which would ultimately culminate with Palpatine and Plagueis, when Palpatine eventually slaughtering his own master, killing him and taking the mantle of Dark Lord, taking a total of 3 apprentices in Maul, Tyrannus, and eventually Darth Vader. And eventually some could consider Luke Skywalker in the Dark Horse Dark Empire comic series. However, the Jedi Order was not always so set in their dogmatic ways and views of the Force, as seen in Star Wars The High Republic 1 by Kavan Scott, Ario Antindido, and Andrea Brocado. This comic displays that before the unified Jedi Order, there was a Jedi Convocation, an assembly of different factions of Force users that met and worked together on the moon of Jedha, an ancient moon that was largely believed to adhere to the Force, and hosted the Church of the Force. These ancient Jedi sought balance between pragmatism and philosophical compromise, and unlike the Jedi under Master Yoda, even with all his wisdom, these Jedi were often divided on their actions, goals, and even the Force itself, and were actively encouraged to explore the Force and have their own path, very similar to the Masasai in ancient Sith tradition in the pure-blooded culture. The Convocation was a meeting of many, often mutually exclusive, sects of Force users, and its example is a fascinating window into how the light side representative used to be way more divided than the monolithic and adherent Jedi that fans know from the prequels. The multiple factions of the light side users existed during the era of the High Republic, and some had philosophies that were so different from one another that they got into literal knockdown Dragonmon fights when it came to time to agree on how to work together. It is hard to say if this approach was an objectively better way of doing things, but these alternate viewpoints did keep the High Republic era Jedi from growing inflexible in their practices and ways of thinking, maybe with more voices of dissent and a more diverse breadth of opinions. The Jedi Council of Yoda's time could have been better suited to adapt to the plans of Sidious and unprecedented situation they found themselves in, only rivaled by the devastation wrought by Darth Nihilus, who single-handedly forced the Jedi Council to go into exile by using his power to drain the life from the entire planet of Qatar. It might be unfair to place the failings of the Jedi on the small shoulders of Yoda, as he was the last Grand Master being in charge of the Jedi Council, and by extension, the Order in its final days, until the rise of Luke Skywalker. After all, it takes a long line of backward-focused leaders before an organization like the Jedi finally succumbs to the weight of its own stagnation. And why Yoda, the supreme avatar of light, supreme master of the Jedi Order, the fiercest, the most implacable, the most devastatingly powerful foe the darkness had ever known, ultimately was the most dogmatic of all the Jedi, and ultimately was the reason that they led to their destruction. Or we can place a lot of the blame on beings like Mace Windu, who were so self-centered in their own views and only cared about the Republic. They barely cared about the Jedi Order as a whole, and failed to peer through the veil of darkness that was being entranced by Darth Sidious, the Dark Lord of the Sith. Yoda had no experimentation under his rule, and which is ultimately, in my opinion, one of the reasons why the Jedi ultimately lost and were wiped to the brink of extinction in the Great Jedi Purge, due to the fact they didn't explore the more mystical side of the Force and its deeper mysteries, and only allowed themselves and their confines to only explore the confines of the Force, not expanding the boundaries, something that Luke Skywalker would later attempt to replicate, as Yoda on Dagobah constantly mused about how he regretted his decisions to not act on Palpatine, and how he had not a sense. Yoda was far too arrogant to ever be the Grand Master, and although he was the most powerful Jedi of the time, and the wisest of all the Order's history, Yoda was not fit to be the Grand Master, no matter how powerful this little green creature may be. So my friends, I'll see you in a galaxy far, far away, and remember, the Force will be with you, always.